In the back? Yes.
Yes, please, appropriate to this, the last question, I hope. I've heard somewhere that actually a lot of American development, let's say in the 19th century, maybe even earlier, was financed by the Russian czars, and that we therefore had a sizable debt to Russia until the revolution in Russia, and that some of our, as you say, gangster-type so-called leaders in this country wanted to promote communism and the revolution in Russia so that they could say, well, we don't owe you guys the money, we owed it to the czars don't exist anymore, and so they got rid of the debt that way, supposedly.
Well, if you don't mind, I'd like to take this topic up, because it's an important topic, but it's a little bit different than the way you said it. But it is important along these lines. First of all, there is a myth that I've never heard, frankly, this story about the czars paying for American development. However, there is a myth that the British paid for American development, including the Rothschilds. And, of course, you know who says that is the British and the Rothschilds, right? They say in particular that the Rothschilds and the British, or either the Bank of England or the Rothschilds, paid for the railroads to be developed. Now, as I said earlier, American government, either national, state, or local, played a role in every railroad development. We had things like the Army Corps of Engineers and similar organizations, Army engineers participating directly in much of this. We did have a Bank of the United States twice, in two 20-year periods, crucial times in the early part of our country. And that bank coordinated private investment in things like railroads and industry. They did go to foreign countries to get investment capital. And in fact, Nicholas Biddle, the president of the Bank of the United States, was very popular in England among the middle class, not the Bank of England characters, but the middle class, because they could make money investing in American railroads. It caused a big problem for the British, because you can make prosperity for everybody doing this kind of system. Now, there's also a slander about the Bank of the United States. It's also, unfortunately, promoted by a lot of populists who claim that the Bank of the United States was controlled by foreign bankers. Absolutely untrue. There's no proof of that whatsoever. The fact is that the exact opposite is the case. The exact opposite. That the Bank of the United States is the only hope of the world for stopping foreign bankers from dominating your country. It's precisely the opposite of what the populists say about that. Now, the United States did have an important relationship to Russia. The first railroad in Russia was built by the American Army Corps of Engineers. In the 1840s, George Washington Whistler, who had been an engineer in West Point, and he had built earlier the first American railroad along with some other West Point engineers, appointed by President John Quincy Adams. This is the Baltimore and Ohio Railroad, first American railroad. In the 1840s, a little bit later, he was hired by the Tsar to go over to Russia and build the first major Russian railroad from Moscow to St. Petersburg. And they brought locomotives from Philadelphia. And he died in Russia. His son was a famous painter, Whistler, who made the painting of Whistler's mother. Russia repaid that debt to America in the Civil War by sending their fleet to the San Francisco and New York harbors to demonstrate to Britain and their puppet France that they better not get involved in the American Civil War on the side of the Confederacy, or they'd have a European war in their hands. America repaid that debt to the Russians by having the guy who built the Union Pacific Railroad, Grenville Dodge, Abraham Lincoln's chief engineer, go over to Russia in the 1890s and be the consultant on building the Trans-Siberian Railroad, which was built by the great westernizer of Russia, Count Witte, W-I-T-T-E, who was a follower of Alexander Hamilton and Frederick List, who wanted to modernize Russia by the American methods. Unfortunately, America was already going under British ideology, so Russia had to try to do something there. The Russian Revolution itself, promoted by the British Party, and Warburg, and Harriman, and this whole party, the Russian Revolution itself was designed to defeat the American types in Russia who were doing something in the late period of the Tsars, to build up a modern system in Russia. They built up an oil industry, they built railroads, they had tariffs. You know, we tell the people in Russia, don't have the government interfere. We tell them that now. Do what we say, not what we did, to build up our country. But that's how Russia got built up itself before the communists took over. Is they had tariffs, they had public development of railroads, they had public promotion of industry, public promotion of science by science academies. Not communist and not totalitarian. Sometimes they had that, and sometimes they fell back under British influence and had free trade and degeneracy, and their industry collapsed. So you had these two systems fighting it out in the world, the British Empire and the United States of America. Our greatest triumph, the greatest moment for us as a nation, was right after the Civil War, when the Confederacy was finished. We had the greatest army in the world. We didn't have the biggest industry in the world, but we're on our way to that with laws passed by Lincoln's government to allow American manufacturers a chance to do something in the market with high tariffs. Cheap credit was available. Public colleges were out there. Private ownership of land by the millions of farms and so forth. At that moment, the world was looking at this spectacle of America as a free country that had finally done in law what its declaration had said about all men are created equal, because we'd abolished slavery. And then you look at the end of the century, only 35 years later, and we fell backwards. We put into effect Jim Crow laws to take back voting rights that had been won in the Civil War. And we were going under British influence in industry and science and technology. Yeah, we made some progress in the 20th century, but actually most of your inventions that we've had in American history are from the 19th century, are from that period. The electric industry, the electric light, motors, and everything to do with this modern society, with the exception of nuclear energy and spaceflight, is all from the 19th century. And if we keep letting the British run our system, we'll never have nuclear energy or spaceflight in the atom.
Wouldn't it be illogical for the British to promote the Bolshevik Revolution, because that way they would lose an ally in the war against Germany? I mean, I can see why they would, during the Russian Revolution, the British supporting it. Once the communists came to power in Russia, they backed out of the war against Germany, and that freed up more German troops in the Eastern Front to fight against the British, or to fight against the British and the French.
Yeah, but it doesn't work that way. What you have a movement. What's the war about? Why have a war? Why have the First World War at all? The war is designed to destroy European potential. The war is designed to eliminate one great threat that you have in geopolitics theory. That threat, according to the British, and they write about this in a lot of books, is the threat that you'll have a strong Germany and a strong Russia and a strong China and maybe some other countries, and that these countries might combine with the United States as a strong country. They might all have, not make one country, that's not necessary or good, but that they might be allied to one another, and so much for the power of Britain. And so the idea is that there should never be on the Eurasian landmass any powerful nations that are not somehow in desperate conflict. And you always have war or destabilization against one or more of these countries, particularly to keep Russia and Germany fighting each other. If you have communism in Russia, they may pull out of the war against Germany, but the best prescription for war and madness in Central Europe is to have communism in Russia and Nazism in Germany, right? So you just let the fiends of hell loose on the planet Earth, according to the British theory. Yes, sir.